Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, Compliance with Containers and Cloud, brought to you by Red Hat Marketplace and Sysdig. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping announcements. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of the webinar, you will be able to access the recording for on-demand viewing. We will also be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit devops.com/webinars. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A tab. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab, so let us know your thoughts or just say a quick hello. We also have a few polling questions during today's event, so we'd appreciate if you could take a couple of seconds to submit your answers when you see those come up on your screen. And finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to see if you're a winner. Joining me today is Dave Muir, Global Principal Solutions Architect, Security ISVs, Red Hat, and Eric Carter, Product Marketing Director, Sysdig. And with that, I'm going to put myself on mute, turn my camera off, and hand it over to Dave.
Thanks, Julio, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here to talk about compliance with containers and cloud. Be here with Eric from Sysdig. As Julio mentioned, I work at Red Hat. I'm focused on our great security partners like Sysdig, as well as helping Red Hat build out a sort of DevSecops point of view and messaging. So we're very excited about this webinar and getting into the different compliance risks and challenges that you'll see within the cloud, how Red Hat can help in that instance, and then obviously how Sysdig can help and show the visibility and controls that Sysdig provides. And then Eric will jump into a demo. And then we'll have time for Q&A, but feel free, like Julio said, please send in questions. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll have a couple of polls for you as we go along. So let me dive into this wonderful slide of compliance regulations and recommendations. I'm sure most of you have seen some of these wonderful acronyms. And if not, overall, there's a very diverse and complex set of compliance frameworks for specific instances. This, if you're new to compliance, you don't have to complete all of these regulations. These are just a sample. But the interesting point about all of this is the sentence at the bottom where you need specific expertise to understand jargon with all these different regulations. So, for example, HIPAA is all around health data and consumer health data and how that's secured. PCI DSS, some of you know, credit card information and protecting credit card holder data. SOC 2 is more about the cloud and how you secure data in the cloud. CIS is a little bit more popular in the IT world. It actually has specific technical controls that you would need to adhere to follow their frameworks and benchmarks. And so that's some of the complexity, is understanding what they do, what they cover, but also if a framework is generic or if it is specific, like HIPAA, for example, is pretty generic. And so there's a lot of room for interpretation with the HIPAA. If we move on, we'll go to our next poll, our first poll, which is which compliance framework do you use today? This is multiple choice. So if you use multiple frameworks, please go ahead and submit that. And we'll give you all a little bit of time to fill that out, about 30 seconds or so. We've got some folks who are using HIPAA. Got some FISMA, FedRAMP. Looks like GDPR is a popular one. That's the European Union, relatively new benchmark and framework. Wow, there's a lot of diversity. Seems like everybody's doing everything. NIST is also up there as well.
I answered on behalf of Sysdig. I know we have had to achieve SOC 2 compliance, but then I forgot, and on the marketing side, we talk a lot about GDPR because it's important to protect people's information, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I missed that one, but yeah, let's see. What's the winner
Looks like
Like
GDPR is
Yeah.
one. Yeah, so good. Got some folks from over the pond listening in.
Yeah, over 20% on GDPR, followed by HIPAA, which must mean we have folks that are maintaining healthcare data with us today, about 15%, right?
Yeah, that's great.
GDPR continues to gain. It's pretty evenly spread, like you said, though.
Yeah, it's good to see. So I guess we'll go ahead and close the poll, Julio, if you want to close the poll, and then we'll continue. But thanks for those answers. That's good stuff. And, man, 10 years ago, if I knew what I know now on this slide, I probably would have become a compliance lawyer, right? I mean, look at all that money that's dedicated to compliance. And it was a noticeable increase after the DoddFrank Act was introduced. For those who don't know, DoddFrank was a response to the financial crisis in 2008, and was put in place to provide accountability, transparency within the financial institution. That's a way oversimplification of it, but it obviously affected the amount of increase with it full-time compliance that you see in companies.
Yeah, we've been impacted by this. I guess it's in a positive way at Sysdig. Like I mentioned, we are SOC 2 compliant, SOC 2 Type 2, I think. And in fact, since you and I prepared for this webinar, I had to go retake certain sets of training that I felt like I had just taken it, but on a yearly basis. That's one of the controls, right? You're educating your workforce to do the right things around data security and other things having to do just with business practices. And think about it, there is a cost to that. It takes people's time, and so I guess in the end, it's worth it. But yeah, it can be it can have some weight to it, and so I guess the simplifying that is key, right?
Yeah, that training goes to operating budget, and all that that money goes to there, as well as legal fees, new technology, right, to get into compliance.
Yeah,
and just compliance staff as well. You've got teams of compliance folks creating those training programs. So there's a lot of money involved in it, and it's a very complex process. Man, we could spend a whole webinar on each one of these, but you look at just figuring out which compliance framework you need to select, and how you implement those different controls. Like I mentioned, HIPAA's opened up to interpretation. I'm sure that's a lot of long meetings and figuring out how to check those boxes. From a technical perspective, I think we're going to show you that it's relatively simple compared to some of these other boxes to implement certain compliance controls, especially for Red Hat Openshift. But then, what I've heard from folks who have been in this a lot is that the documentation and the reporting and the monitoring is just a ton of work. So there's a lot of work, especially if you don't have technology involved, to manually document that you've completed this process. And it's not a one-time thing. It's a yearly process. So if we go to the next wonderful slide of acronyms and bullets, this is really just to provide an overview that Red Hat cares. And especially within Openshift, we've done a lot of work. There's a lot of work behind these links around guides on how you deploy to become HIPAA compliant or ISO 27100 or 001, on Openshift. We did a lot of work. The last link there on a CIS benchmark for Openshift 4, that's actually posted on the CIS site, so you can download that as well, and it'll provide you not only requirements on what you need to achieve that benchmark requirement, but also OC commands, like Openshift client, CLI commands to turn on or turn off whatever needs to happen to achieve that compliance, or to check as well. And we worked with Sysdig early on when we were creating that benchmark document. And I know Eric will talk about this, but they imported those commands within Sysdig to be able to show you visually that you're compliant or not. So it's all good stuff. A lot of work has been done, not only internal Red Hat, but external with our partners. And the column on the right talks about Openshift's managed services certification. So like you mentioned, Eric, we've done a lot of work, SOC 2, SOC Type 1, Type 2, ISO, PCI, DSS, FedRAMP, and others on our Openshift managed services. You see a lot of acronyms there. It's basically Openshift on AWS. We've got 2 flavors of that. Openshift on Google Cloud Platform, Openshift on IBM. So we're going through a lot of those and maintaining those certifications as well. One thing to mention about compliance, one specific feature that I always like to bring up is Red Hat Advanced Cluster Manager or Advanced Cluster Management. There's one piece in there. It does a lot of things. You can think about it as like a CRUD for clusters. So creates clusters, updates them, deletes clusters, essentially provides a view for you if you have multiple clusters, wherever they are, hybrid, public cloud, on-prem. You can bring that view in a centralized manner to manage that cluster lifecycle. It also has some centralized application lifecycle as well, capabilities as well. The interesting thing around compliance is that it has an ability to ensure governance and compliance across your fleet of clusters. One of the things that Sysdig did early on was to create, it's very easy, create a YAML file that you can enter into Rackham, and it will ensure that the Sysdig agent is installed in all of your clusters, wherever they are. By the way, you can also manage just pure Kubernetes clusters if you wanted to as well within Rackham. So that's very cool. That kind of goes back to the slide I was talking about, implementing controls. That's this box here. You can use Rackham to implement Sysdig, which provides a bunch of compliance controls, which we'll talk about, on all your clusters. So you know what clusters are in compliance or not really easily with just click a couple buttons.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, Dave, is like, because we're now living in this world where we can not just, we can spin up container workloads and down, both ways, right? Nodes that are coming and going, clusters even that are being built up and then torn down. It can be easy to get out of compliance and or not have the right security controls applied to X versus Y versus Z. And I think that was the point behind us working on this together, is like, can we give you visibility across everything that's popping up or being controlled in or provisioned in your environment? And can you A, see, or B, ensure gets deployed the right security level stuff, right security controls? We're just one piece of that, right? So I think that's kind of what we're here to speak about, is that in the cloud world, things are moving so fast that the compliance can be much more challenging than a bare metal or just straight VM environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. Cool. So one more slide for me, and that's the Openshift slide, which I actually like this slide. It's more of a DevSecops security-focused Openshift slide. You may have seen some in the past where they provide all sorts of services on top of Openshift that you would get above and beyond just vanilla Kubernetes. But this one shows at a high level a lot of the security features that you get that you would have to think about, that you would have to add or deploy on top of Kubernetes if you just started with the upstream community version. One of the things that sort of I think goes unnoticed a lot of times is that first box under control is trusted content. What that means is we've got a very large team of security professionals ensuring that any security issues, like any vulnerabilities or things like that within Openshift itself, are addressed in a timely manner. We backport versions as well. So if you have, for example, version 4.6 of Openshift, which is the version that we're maintaining for a while now, it's we're backporting that security fixes into that version while we still continue to rev out newer versions. 4.9 just came out, for example. You can see, CI/CD pipeline is available within Openshift. Now, that's not a security feature itself, but it's a very critical point in adding security into the DevOps pipeline so that you can address issues earlier rather than right when they're deployed. But you see all sorts of protect, detect, and respond. We have some lower level stuff. The platform, this is all really related to platform like container isolation, network isolation. And then we leverage our partners like Sysdig to provide enhanced and extended features and capabilities on security around observability monitoring that you'll see here in a little bit. So that leads us to our second poll question, poll number 2. So Julio has entered that or activated that. So the question is, where are you in your container adoption? Where are you in your container adoption? So I will check the poll results. I'm glad to see so far we don't have anybody using containers for their holiday decorations. Although it's fine if you don't know what containers are, we're very welcoming here. But some trainees, some folks who have been developing with containers but not yet into production. Got a guru in the crowd who could probably give this webinar. Sounds good. But most are competent right now with the trainees trailing. So there's 43% right now competent, and about 33% trainees, about 13% experts, and that one guru. So we'll give you a couple more seconds to think about where you are. I would, I got to be honest. I can't call myself a guru because I work on Openshift and I know about it, but I don't develop and run applications in production. My business does have critical container applications in production, but I'm not a guru itself. I would consider myself more on the expert side. Ooh, another guru. Good.
Yeah, looks like competent. 47, 44. Oh, now it went down 44%. So competent and trainee continues to be kind of the I don't know if you call it the sweet spot, but that's where folks are. And that's important because it seems like that's, this is where we are in the market in terms of use of the technology. Most people are planning on it. They're moving in the direction, getting more into production.
Yeah.
But
yeah, 5 years ago, I don't think we would have any experts or gurus.
Yeah.
There was not a lot. Yeah, it's good to see. Okay.
Great.
Well, we'll close that poll and then I'll hand it over to Eric here. So it's all yours.
Great. And thanks, Dave, as always. Appreciate that. And what I want to do here is talk a little bit more about compliance and looking at it from kind of the visibility standpoint with some security controls and things. And obviously we'll tie that into what Sysdig can do. And then I'll get into the demo. I simplified kind of your chart from earlier, Dave, but I also think that this kind of goes to one of the questions that we were asking if we were going to talk about specific rules for the CCPA compliance standard. By the way, I know this because I just did my training that talked a lot about the differences between different standards. This is the California Consumer Privacy Act, and we won't get into the book, chapter, and verse for that, Steve. But a lot of it still comes down to controls, the fact that you're testing those controls, the fact that you also have proof that you've put those things in place from a best practices standpoint. And actually, I was looking up, and there's a lot to be said in any standard, including CCPA, about how are you handling privacy and data security? How are you handling things like protection against data breaches along with that? How are you handling things like, protecting against identity theft, which all these things are wrapped up together. And those are the processes, mechanisms, and controls. And it often doesn't say you're going to use product X and do Y. You get to choose and work through that and document that. But then it's important clearly to get those things in place, test those things on a regular basis, which is kind of the season we're in here at Sysdig, thus my trainings, etc. And then to be able to report back what happened. And all of those things, I'm making the point here, all those things require some level of visibility to know what's happening, to know that things are working as expected and as planned, and to be able to show the business or consumers even, yes, we as a business have done the right things. And so this is, again, one of those places where you can run into challenges here with, especially with containerized workloads, even workloads in the cloud, because of some of the abstractions that we now deal with, or the fact that someone else is potentially running the service and not us. Do I really know what's happening, right? So I think it's important to be able to understand what are the things that you need to look after and how can you get there. So what should you observe? And for the purposes of this section and session, I want to talk specifically about two things. One is the workloads and the other is the infrastructure. And workloads, I'm thinking about the things you're developing, you're putting them in containers, or maybe it's also a cloud service, but and then infrastructure, which could be your Openshift deployments on-prem, could be your cloud deployments, and so on, right? And so what are we looking for? Well, you thinking about this concept of data breaches and so on, right? You need to be aware if there are known vulnerabilities. And thank you, Dave and Red Hat. I am subscribed to various alerts that come to me that say, hey, there's been a new vulnerability detected in X, Y, whatever thing it might be, and there's a fix available or not available. So those are things, there are things you can know up front to have your best foot forward, right? And so those are important to look after. And in a minute, we'll talk about how you can do that with things like image scanning. But then, obviously I can fix all the vulnerabilities and feel really comfortable today, put it into production, and then Dave's cousin from New Jersey breaks into my system and suddenly has access to something. So we need to watch for unexpected behavior and activity, and hopefully have some sort of audit trail. And again, that can be a challenge as a container spins up, does something, and stops. It might take with it the information that you needed. And I'm going to talk about how we can solve that problem. On the infrastructure side, Dave was just talking about Rackham and other things. And with the cloud providers, we have this ability to manage things at scale and spin things up and down. And sometimes keeping track is a challenge. And we want to always kind of keep an eye on what are the things that I'm using, or that team X, DevOps team's doing one thing, maybe an application team of a certain point is doing another thing, right? We need to be careful of those things and make sure they're configured correctly. There's a data point, and I don't have it in the slide, but that misconfigurations are a huge part of what goes wrong when it comes to security issues and things like that, right? And then, a lot of times it's accidental. We didn't do it because we didn't see it. Again, back to visibility. And other times, there are just folks that are moving fast for your business by necessity. We live in a world of this kind of agile. It's the whole concept of doing things, cloud native and DevOps. And risky behavior could be happening, not for malicious reasons, but then sometimes the behavior might actually cross the line into something malicious. And so we need to be able to see those things too. So there are these risks kind of everywhere, and you can get your arms around it and try and put some things in place that will give you a leg up as far as reaching your goals. And I'm going to talk about a few things here. And what I'm thinking about now is kind of this life cycle from the time we're trying to build things, spin up our cloud, spin up our Openshift clusters, all the way through running in production. And then if something happens or we have an auditor knock on the door, how do we deal with that? So let's start on the left at kind of when we're coding or we're trying to figure out our architectures and what the apps are. We are more and more using things like infrastructure as code, think Terraform or AWS, you have CloudFormation templates and so on. There's ways, just YAML itself and Helm charts and operators, right? They offer a way to do things in an automated fashion. And the challenge there is that if we believe we've got this thing that's going to deploy reliably our infrastructure over and over again, and there's a configuration issue with that, then we could be spinning up things over and over again that represent risk or aren't configured correctly. So there's this movement to be able to not just use infrastructure as code, but to check it frequent and often for that it's doing the right thing, or that there hasn't been drift over time, meaning someone actually went in and did a little tweak, didn't best intentions. So we want to be able to watch and look at those things for where we might be out of compliance. I mentioned earlier vulnerabilities and the idea of image scanning. It's a great place to stamp out the possibility of putting data at risk. And you can do that in registries, but you can also pull that into kind of your CI/CD pipeline so that someone who's building these containers and the things you're putting in your container images can see before even pushing it out into a registry for use, can see what needs to be fixed, kind of vulnerabilities at a high, medium, low, and decide what needs to be fixed before we move forward. And so if you're not doing that at this point, you might be at risk. Now, the good news is tooling like Quay and so on have this built in. Sysdig has things built in. We help you also implement that in CI/CD pipelines. Now we're happy. We believe we're happy. We fixed vulnerabilities. We've sort of matched against our compliance standards, and now we're going to be running in production. Okay, so it's important to kind of, again, early and often check what's the configuration or configurations of my cloud infrastructure, my Kubernetes or my Openshift clusters. Have I done the right things there from a permission standpoint, and on and on and on, right? And it can be a challenge to do that. And there are tools called kind of security posture management that can help check that on a regular basis and give you sort of the greens, yellows, and reds. And I'll show you that in Sysdig to help you see, hey, this is not configured correctly and could represent risk, right? And so you want to be able to have that, and then you'll want to be able to detect, as I was saying earlier, things like Dave's cousin from New Jersey breaking in and trying to hack the system, right? Those are things that fixing a vulnerability or doing image scanning will never fix. And this has been particularly challenging with containers because they come and go. We did a report last year. We're going to do it again in the coming year. It's sort of like a huge percentage of containers run for 5 minutes or less. So do I understand in that 5-minute runtime, or have I captured exactly what potentially was happening? And so if you haven't looked at things like runtime security tooling, that's something that you should consider if you're doing containers, Kubernetes. There's open source Falco, which is something that Sysdig started, now CNCF. You can leverage that. You can leverage what I'll show you in the demo. And then responding, right? There's going to be things that happen, and we want to be able to have the right information. So reporting on activity, who did what, what namespaces, what clusters, what clouds, what regions, right? And you want to be able to have what you need in order to diagnose, remediate, or even in the compliance context, look back to the business and say, we understand what happened here. And that's a big part of kind of avoiding fines and so on, right? And then this is kind of a loop, right? As we discover that maybe something wasn't set up right from the beginning, or the world changed, let's go back to the beginning, codify that, do the right things all the way throughout the life cycle. So it can, and it looks complex. I think anyone in the DevOps space who now considers themselves having to do security, DevSecops, will recognize a lot of these steps. And maybe you've done a few of them, but not implemented tools for all of them. We'd recommend you look at doing that.
Yeah, if I could jump in here, I want to make a couple points. One is, man, it's tough to control those cousins from New Jersey. And and two, if the audience hasn't really caught on over the last couple of slides you've been talking about, it is, analyze your configurations. Misconfigurations is a big deal these days. It's been backed up by data. Red Hat did a State of Kubernetes security report. Do it every year. This year, over 95% of the respondents had a security incident within their Kubernetes environment, and 60% of those, the reason was because of a misconfiguration. So as Eric mentioned, the last slide, this slide, Kubernetes being such a declarative type of technology with all these configurations, it's got to be just as important or more as you scanning for vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities was the big thing for a while with images and applications and secrets management. Those are all so very important, but misconfigurations should be up there as well in terms of monitoring it and automating that compliance as well for configurations.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to name the very large electric car company who left something misconfigured in a Kubernetes cluster and thing, right? So again, case in point, right? Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and it is just like, look, you may have to do various things in this compliance space, and what we're encouraging you to do is another way of looking at it. Check the build, check the cloud and infrastructure, make sure you're watching during runtime, and then get the information you need to be successful if there's an audit. And what I'm going to do when I get in the demo is kind of show you how we at Sysdig are trying to bring all this together, and we surround the firm foundation that is Red Hat OpenShift with either complementary or extended, I guess I would say, capabilities beyond some of the things that Dave outlined are already there and available just by adopting OpenShift as your standard. On the cloud side, being able to see in conjunction with whatever you're doing in containers, being able to see what's happening by tapping into things like cloud logs, and more and more of our customers and our Red Hat and Sysdig are deploying these solutions wholesale in a public cloud type infrastructure. And so there are some tools there that we can tap into to show you what's happening in and around those services. And on the workload side, being able to help you scan and have the visibility to what's going on, help simplify setting up things like your network security policies with OpenShift, and so on, right? And to give you that view, and which I'll show you in just a second. At the end of the day, all we're trying to do is help you achieve that compliance standard sooner than later and make it a little bit easier. And it's not that Dave and I will stand here today and say, if you need to be PCI compliant, all you need to do is put in Sysdig and Red Hat. That's not it, right? I mentioned, there are multifacets to it, but we can certainly get you from a systems standpoint a fair chunk of the way there in the journey, because we've been studying these standards and trying to codify that into our products. One of those customers that has been on with us and told their story, which you can go find on our websites, is Worldpay, and credit cards in the cloud. And as I always say, anytime our credit cards are somewhere, we get a little nervous about, is this something going to happen? Great news is you get good protection there, but having to meet that PCI standard is pretty strict. And Bernd and the team at Worldpay chose, regardless of where we're going to spin up our compute resources and run our workloads, whether that's on-prem or in any of the public clouds, we want to use Red Hat OpenShift as a common platform, because we trust a lot of the controls that have been put in place, and we want to use Sysdig for the visibility and additional controls, so that we can keep our arms around what's happening. And once again, because they're dealing with millions of dollars traversing their payment systems, and thousands of vendors who use their services. And so keeping track of that is really important. And so it's a good case study that you can jump out and see out on our websites. So let's do this. Let me show you a little bit of what we've tried to do to help the equation of visibility into compliance and putting some of those controls in place. So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to share my screen and pop up the demo. All right, it looks like it's showing up. So what I've done is I've dropped into the Sysdig UI in effect, right? And Sysdig has really two parts. One is called Sysdig Secure, and one is called Sysdig Monitor. Both can be important to the compliance equation. We're going to spend our time in Sysdig Secure today, and I've jumped into basically what's an Uber view of kind of the hot spots in an environment, whether I'm running across any particular cloud or have Red Hat OpenShift running in these clouds or on-prem. I can see it all in one place. And what we're doing is we're bubbling up, in this case, some things that are happening around Kubernetes, like people writing in certain places they shouldn't, or modifying files. or clearing logs, which could be an attempt. And you can click on any of these things and understand, okay, what is it that's going on, and even get further information into where these things are happening. Like someone's running a shell in a container. Am I violating some of these tagged standards, right? Notice a lot of these have to do with compliance standards. So what we've done is we've said, okay, when this thing triggers that someone is connected to a container and doing some things from a shell, that's probably not a great practice and will violate compliance standard X, Y, or Z. And you can get a view all the way down into what's happening and where in terms of your environment. Now, we realize that some cases, you want to correlate that or even look at just pure cloud activity. So we can give you that kind of view as well, which is what's happening around my cloud services. Is somebody logging in without multi-factor authentication and therefore might, again, violating a clear practice for compliance? You should have multi-factor authentication. And so we're trying to help bubble those things up so that anything that puts you at risk of meeting a compliance standard, you can address it immediately. Even showing you from a user perspective, which is kind of love, because I can see which one of my coworkers, like Sweta or Eric, gentleman named Eric Lugo, like, oh, they're up to something. And in your business, it may be that, again, not intentional, you can go have a conversation. What I love most is this kind of composite view where you bring it all together. On my AWS cloud, running my Openshift cluster, here is kind of the things that are cloud related and the things that are Kubernetes related that might be causing me some issues here. So that's a relatively new view from the Sysdig UI, but let's back up. We mentioned this kind of idea of starting from the beginning, putting your best foot forward when I'm building versus then running and then responding. And you'll see on the left side here, and I'm going to probably do this a little shorter and faster than I normally do it, but everything from scanning to checking the posture of your systems to setting up policies that will help you watch in runtime and other things like that, right? On the scanning side, you can see that you have this ability to tap into, let's just show it from a simple perspective, registries. Like if I'm working with Red Hat, I might have my redhat.io in here, Quay, I've got my cloud, we're pulling containers from everywhere. And that's a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that we can just grab something like a pre-built MySQL container, but is it configured correctly? And have I checked it for the latest vulnerabilities? Maybe, maybe not, right? And so people are often pulling from public registries and have their own private ones. And what you want to do is be able to set up scanning policies. And what we've done is we've mapped a bunch of the scanning policies to industry compliance standards. And I'll just pick one, like the PCI one here. And you can apply this against your registry. You can also apply it in your CI/CD pipeline, as I mentioned. And what we're trying to do is help you know what to check for. Obviously, you're going to check for OS and package vulnerabilities. But what about other things like third-party libraries and vulnerabilities and different user settings? Am I running as root, right? That may be a super bad idea. And obviously, sometimes we grab containers and start to run them. We forgot to change the permission, right? And you can do things like just get a warning, or you can even stop something from proceeding further through your CI/CD pipeline. It can never hit a registry, therefore it can never roll out into production. And so we're trying to make it easier for you to set up policies and sort of automate the checking of these things. And you can build your own, and there's a bunch of rules and things that we're going to be able to check for, passwords, files, and so on, including certain licenses in the container image. So real deep check, right, to keep us out of trouble. And then obviously as things get scanned, I'm going to go to my image results. You can do things like, narrow down run reports, or say, show me that Quay registry and how I'm doing with the images there, and then dive in and kind of click through to see the vulnerabilities. Now, the other thing that I can do, obviously, I may have pushed it out yesterday and it's running today. I kind of want to know, where am I at risk for a running container? And so we actually give you that view as well. So we, in effect, scan a running container. What it really means is that we understand that this container is of this version, and therefore we understand now that the new vulnerability discovered today is in fact impacting that. Now, how we've tried to simplify this for teams is, let's say I'm part of the Java app team, we can actually slice and dice this information. In this case, we're looking at it by namespace, but you can decide how to look at those things by using some metadata to organize your view. But I'm part of the Java team. I want to know, am I at risk at all today? And in fact, I am. All of my containers are failing, right? And so I can, again, click through that and understand which policies am I now kind of in trouble for or with, go even further and start to click through and see what things I need to fix. So that's on the image scanning side. Keep yourself protected. Make sure you're doing that. You can even pair that with something like an image admission controller. So I want to even further stop any kind of images from entering into a cluster and running if they haven't been scanned, or maybe they're old and they haven't been scanned in 15 days. Let's reject them and keep them from running. So again, we're trying to tie in the visibility of what's there, give you the help you need to fix it, visibility, or at least automating, allowing or disallowing a container to run. But let's say now we are running and we want to set up some policies to watch for Dave's cousin, that bad behavior. And you're going to see a bunch of things in here, right? And all these scary words like suspicious and sensitive info exfiltration. And each one of these is built on top of something. There's open source Falco, which again was a project that we had started. That kind of looks like this. It's very powerful. You can start with Falco, but then what we've done is we've built it into more of an enterprise class, multi-cluster at scale with a UI solution that helps you watch for things in the environment. And when doing that, to have some level of not only setting this up to watch, but where do I want to watch? Do I want to watch across my entire environment, or is it really this one place that's super sensitive that has my credit card data? And I want to set that up for a particular namespace, like maybe it's somewhere in here, it's my sock shop, right? That's where the data is that I really need to stop anyone from, not even an admin should be running containers, commands in a container. If it happens, let's kill that. Let's make sure I send a notification, let's send a notification to something like Slack or whatnot. And then I can even create this thing we call a capture file. Think of a capture file as like TCP dump of old, right? It's a capture of all the activity system called where this activity occurred. Because if that container gets killed or is no longer running, we want to have all of the information to reconstruct the what, the who, the where, and so on. Right? So once you're in business with those things, you can then, of course, watch for those events as they trigger, right? And then do some investigation. Right? And
those definitely look like something my cousin would be doing.
Yeah. Now, what I skipped over, and I think is important because I like how this shows up, is we looked at how we deal with our image side. We're looking at how to deal with runtime, but what about those configurations that we just mentioned we're so concerned about and the drift that could happen there? So what we've done is giving you a bunch of kind of posture checks, whether it's dealing with something like the cloud or whether it's dealing with workloads, even putting in place the ability to run these benchmarks, right? And in here, like I can add a new one and make it very specific to the Red Hat Openshift platform, right? And set that up to run, tell myself where I want to run it and so on. But let's see if I can find one that's already ran in here, because they want to show, there's one for Openshift that we did, gives you an idea. How am I doing? How many of these controls that are related to the CIS known best practice benchmark, and which ones are failing? Where do I need to go do some work, right? And so what we've done, again, this is not our intellectual property per se, but we're helping you to run it, and then we're giving you information about what is this check that's failing, and how is it addressed, and what can I do to turn this red to green, and always be improving from a compliance standpoint. And that's essentially what these things that you'll find here under posture are for: looking at your cloud, looking at your workload, looking at your Openshift or Kubernetes infrastructure, and giving you a readout. Here, and then surfacing you a metric to help you understand how things are going. So another key piece of the puzzle that I think, you have this capability, Dave, I think you mentioned even just on the Openshift side, there's something that helps you run these benchmarks. And again, what we're doing at Sysdig is bringing them all into a control panel for you so that you can run and see things without jumping around. Right?
Yeah, I didn't mention it, but yeah, you're right. It's the compliance operator, which this absolutely extends and enhances. But yeah, you can, like you said, I mean, there's all this open source information and compliance information you can tie into out there. And the compliance operator is one way, but yeah, providing a centralized view across multiple clusters, this is where Sysdig excels.
Great. So I was previously over here on these events, and I want to share one more thing. We've identified that this rule triggered, when it triggered, kind of the where it triggered, but I want to look further into it. There's a few things you can do. One is we're capturing an activity audit. The activity audit is going to give you any commands that were written, the network activity, kubectl, things going on, and any file activity. And so in a given point in time, even if, again, it's not running anymore, I have the information and ability to see kind of the nefarious activity or otherwise. And this one kind of goes on and on because someone dealt with kind of pulling a file, getting into a container, pulling some files in, unzipping it, right? And it goes on and on in terms of that. But then in the end, the punchline is, hey, I'm going to shred my history, right? And we always show this one because it just illustrates the kind of data that you can pull out and get. And what I'm not going to do today is jump into more of those capture files, but you can go even further, right? And all of these file reads and writes, you can go see what were those payloads, what was actually in that. And in that way, you really have everything that you need for your protection, for meeting any kind of compliance controls that you said you were going to be implementing and doing, right? And so ultimately, the summary is it's our goal to give you insights, obviously, named insight, to help you from the beginning, middle, and end, and to do this in conjunction with secure platforms and cloud platforms. And we can help you achieve at least the visibility into things that you can help ensure the compliance of your system. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen at this point. We'll return to the slides. And I know we're getting some questions, but let me do this. Let me pull you back over here. So how can you get started? Well, one thing, and we are happy of the folks at Red Hat Marketplace who helped us kind of organize this session today. We have taken the time to put the Sysdig solution there so that as you're doing business or things with Red Hat, you can also grab things from Sysdig. You can learn more there. You can start a trial there. You can even purchase there. So marketplace.redhat.com, a fun place to just go explore and see what solutions are there that can add value and help you achieve things like security, compliance, visibility, monitoring. So wanted to make sure that we encourage you to go check that out. And then again, visit the marketplace, but you can also go grab, there's a hot off the presses case study around ATPCO. ATPCO is kind of responsible for kind of the standardization and all of the fare information for air travel, kind of co-owned by all of the airlines. And so they have a lot of important things that they're running on Red Hat Openshift. They're securing and monitoring it with Sysdig. It's a nice case study to kind of give you a flavor of how these things all work together. On the right-hand side, additional kind of links for resources, learning more about our partnership with Red Hat and Sysdig, trying Openshift. And Dave, is that red.hat DevSecops, is that all the part of that series that you've been putting together to tell the DevSecops story?
It is, yeah, thanks. We actually updated that page recently with that story. We've created a DevSecops framework that helps to categorize and have the discussion of DevSecops within a pipeline and where all these different security functions fit. And then you'll also see a lot of treatment on our partners and where they fit as well. So it's been a helpful framework to, go to a customer and say, here's where Sysdig sits next to what Red Hat does in these different, types of security controls and methods. And compliance, obviously, is part of that framework. It's actually one out of 9 categories, and there's 2 controls out of 34 other controls that you might want to think about when doing DevSecops. Compliance just having, the compliance audit and compliance sort of controls or automation around it as well. It's a lot of good stuff, and you can definitely try Openshift for free. And yeah, that marketplace has been nice to have. IBM is actually helping to support that as well. As some of you may know, IBM's our grandfather, or I should say our father. We've had a lot of good help and collaboration from the IBM folks to maintain the marketplace.
Awesome. All right, so this brings us, first of all, we'll just say thank you to everyone, but stick around. We have some questions. And so we'll enter into our Q&A session and then leave this slide up to, as our summary that we just want to help you be more confident as you move into this space, right? I will upfront say there are some things asked here that are really getting into some of the particulars of some of the standards and what even feels a little bit like political differences between the EU and US. I don't think we'll be able to address those, Steve, but it's super interesting, and I think what we're coming at it more from an angle of how can we help you with some level of security and control that's provable and that's reliable. There is a question here, different processes, steps required to achieve PCI DSS compliance from Paul. There will be a lot of commonality across things. I would imagine that in the case of, and Dave, you feel free to chime in again, things like file integrity monitoring and really being able to see that locked down data locations or storage is in fact locked down and safe, and no one's been altering those files, because that's where that credit card information is. And maybe that feels like it should be relevant against any compliance standard. But obviously there may be others that are a little more light, where we're less concerned than we would be with financial data.
Yeah, it's got to be all that encryption and what type of data you're storing and where and who can access it, right? You get into conversation around zero trust and all that good stuff. But yeah, like you said, I don't think we're experts. We probably need compliance lawyers to answer some of these questions. They're great questions. I'm going to start Googling.
But it reminds me, Paul, there is a guide that we've got out on the Sysdig library, Sysdig resource library, that has kind of more of the book chapter verse and some of the things that you need to think about. Now, it's not contrasting it with any other standard, but it is speaking to PCI. So you might want to go grab that. Just go to sysdig.com and resources library and check, see if you can find that. All right, so other questions. Can we use these tools on the public cloud? I think that I demonstrated that, and Dave, I think,
yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah, Red Hat's mission is the open hybrid cloud, so you can use these both on-prem or in the cloud. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know there are Red Hat services that are even more formal that are part of many of the cloud providers, or you get your cloud instances and you spin up your own clusters, right?
That's right.
Manage them that way.
Yeah. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I know there was a question around the difference between ROSA and OpenShift Dedicated and all the different acronyms. At the high level view is ROSA, which is Red Hat OpenShift Service on AWS, versus OpenShift Dedicated on AWS. It's a difference between who manages that. And so there's some billing differences in how the tools are deployed. From a user perspective, it'll be transparent. ROSA, Red Hat OpenShift Service on AWS, is jointly managed by AWS and Red Hat, whereas OpenShift Dedicated is only managed by Red Hat. So that's sort of the main differences there at a high level.
Gotcha. All right, why don't we do this, because we're running out of time, and I think we need to have Julio do some final housekeeping.
Right.
if I'm not mistaken. So we'll answer the rest of these sort of offline. I think some of them we've answered through the course of the presentation, so we're probably good there. Julio, are you still with us? Do you want to come back in and do the final bits and pieces here?
Yes,
Right.
excellent. Just to remind everybody that today's webinar has been recorded, so if you miss any or all of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending an email with a link to access the webinar on demand, and you can also find it on devops.com. Just look in the on-demand section and the webinars page, and you will find it there. I did mention at the beginning that we were doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our winners today are Rachel A. Congratulations, Rachel. Miguel M. Steve C. And finally, Jean G. So congratulations to all our winners. We'll be reaching out via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, check your spam folder. Dave and Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to put this presentation together. The polls and Q&A section was really inspiring, really nice to hear. So thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thanks to the audience. All right. Let us know if we can help.
Absolutely. And yes, on that note, I would like to thank the audience for their time and engagement. This is Julio Godinez signing off until next time. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye now.